$50,000 in crisp, unbundled hundreds sat stacked on the mahogany desk, promised to anyone who could open the oxidized brass lockbox without triggering the acid vial inside. 20 men in tailored suits and grease-stained overalls had walked in confident and left sweating. They used fiber-optic scopes, liquid nitrogen, and diamond-tipped drills. Nothing worked. The study stank of failure and expensive cologne, a cloying miasma that clung to the walls along with decades of cigar smoke. Dominic Rossi hadn't slept in 72 hours. His alpha instincts were frayed raw, scraping against the inside of his skull like broken glass. The suppressants he'd injected that morning had done little to dull the edge. They never did when his brother's life hung in the balance. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to rip something apart, to taste blood, to fix this through sheer force of will. The 21st expert was packing up his equipment, his beta sent acrid with humiliation. "Mr. Rossi, I'm telling you, this isn't a standard pin tumbler. It's a deadlock mechanism wired to a secondary glass vial. The vibration alone. Get out." Dominic's voice was a low rasp, stripped of all emotion. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the glass of warm scotch in his hand. He simply set it down with a quiet, terrifying click that made the expert flinch and abandon his $1,000 tools on the floor. "Leave the equipment," Caleb rumbled from his position by the velvet drapes. The beta enforcer was a mountain of a man, always smelling faintly of peppermint and gun oil. "Just walk." The expert walked. Dominic dragged his palm down his face. The stubble along his jaw was thick, the muscle beneath it twitching with suppressed violence. He could feel his alpha instincts coiling tighter, the beast in his chest demanding action, demanding blood, demanding something to sink his teeth into. His brother Leo was in a cartel warehouse in Tijuana, and if that ledger wasn't opened by midnight, the firing squad would be the least of Leo's problems. The cartel had ways of making death last. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11:42. 18 minutes. His gaze swept the room, the scattered tools, the scratched brass of the lockbox, the 20 failed experts who'd come and gone. And then it landed, almost dismissively, on the corner of the study. There, practically swallowed by the shadows of the towering bookshelves, stood a figure in a shapeless gray uniform. The Omega's presence was so faint, so deliberately invisible, that Dominic had forgotten he was even in the room. He smelled of cheap bleach and exhaustion, the sharp chemical tang cutting through the haze of cigar smoke and spilled scotch. His uniform was 2 sizes too big, bought at a thrift store and hemmed with safety pins that glinted dully in the harsh halogen light. Dominic's nostrils flared. Beneath the bleach, beneath the industrial ammonia and the faint sourness of a body pushed past its limits, there was something else. Something faint and sweet, like burnt sugar, like the last ember of a dying fire. It was barely perceptible, drowned out by the Omega's own stress pheromones, but Dominic caught it. His alpha instinct stirred, curious despite everything. The Omega, Sadie, according to the staffing agency paperwork Caleb had shoved in his face 3 hours ago, was squeezing his mop through the industrial yellow wringer. Water murky and gray splashed into the bucket. Sadie's lower back was probably throbbing. Dominic noticed the way he shifted his weight, the subtle wince as he straightened. The Omega had been on his feet since 4 a.m., scrubbing baseboards in the East Wing, and now he was being forced to clean up the mud tracked in by 24 failed experts. Dominic looked away. The Omega was nothing. A ghost. A piece of furniture. Sadie's hands were red and raw, the cuticles split from hours in harsh cleaning chemicals. His thumb throbbed where he'd caught it on the industrial wringer an hour ago, the skin already purpling into a bruise. He dunked the mop again, the cold water biting at his abraded skin, and tried to ignore the oppressive weight of alpha pheromones saturating the room. Dominic Rossi smelled like cedar and something darker, gunpowder, maybe, or the metallic tang of old blood. It was the scent of a predator at the end of his leash, dangerous and unpredictable. Sadie had been in this mansion for 6 months, and in all that time, he'd perfected the art of being invisible. He moved silently, kept his head down, never made eye contact. Betas and alphas alike treated him like furniture, less than furniture, really. At least Dominic Rossi looked at the leather couch when he sat on it. He'd never once looked at Sadie. Until now. Dominic's head snapped toward the sound of squeaking casters as Sadie pushed the yellow bucket forward across the hardwood. His dark eyes locked onto Sadie, bloodshot and furious. For a second, the sheer violence radiating from the alpha pinned Sadie to the floorboards. He froze, his hands gripping the plastic handle of the mop so tightly his knuckles went white. "Do you have to do that right now?" Dominic asked. His voice was soft, but it cut through the silence like a blade. The exhaustion in his tone was heavy, dragging his shoulders down, but beneath it was something sharper. Something that made Sadie's Omega instinct scream at him to submit, to bare his throat, to apologize. Sadie stared at the puddle of muddy water near the Persian rug. He wanted to say, "Your goon told me to clean the mud." He wanted to say, "If I don't finish this room, I don't get cleared to leave." Instead, he whispered, "No, sir. I'll wait." Dominic turned away, dragging a heavy hand down his face. "Caleb," he muttered. "Call the guy in Brooklyn. The one with the thermal lance." "Boss, a thermal lance will cook the inside of the box in 3 seconds." Caleb stepped away from the door. "We might as well just drop the acid ourselves. Do we have another option?" Dominic snapped, suddenly slamming his fist down on the armrest. The leather groaned. "Midnight, Caleb. Midnight." Sadie stood perfectly still, holding his breath. The room was suffocating. The alpha's frustration was a physical weight pressing down on him, triggering an instinctive response he couldn't control. His pulse quickened. His palms grew slick with sweat. Every fiber of his Omega nature was screaming at him to diffuse the tension, to soothe, to fix. He looked past Dominic, past Caleb, straight at the scarred brass box sitting under the harsh glare of the halogen work light Miller had left behind. The light illuminated the green oxidation on the metal, the thick layer of grime settled into the intricate floral carvings. 20 experts had looked at it as a masterpiece of mechanical engineering. Sadie looked at it through the lens of dirt. His breath caught. The heavy brass rosette right next to the keyhole, the decorative lotus flower, was crusted with something hard and amber. Not rust. Not oxidation. Spilled liquor and decades of cigar resin that had seeped into a hairline seam and crystallized into cement. The keyhole, by contrast, had a faint ring of pale, untouched brass around its inner lip. A key had gone in and out of it recently, polishing the metal through friction. The keyhole was a decoy. Sadie abandoned the mop handle. It clattered against the lip of the bucket, a loud intrusion in the tense silence of the study. Caleb shot him a venomous glare, his hand instinctively dropping toward the bulge beneath his tailored suit jacket. Sadie ignored him. He wiped his damp, chemical-smelling hands on his apron and took a step toward the mahogany desk. "Hey!" Caleb barked, stepping into his path. The scent of peppermint was overpowering now, mixed with the sharp tang of aggression. "Back to the corner, sweetheart. Or better yet, get the hell out of here. The floor is wet." Sadie's voice was barely a murmur, flat and devoid of the terror Caleb was used to inspiring. He pointed a cracked finger toward the desk. "I need to dry the perimeter of the rug before the ammonia eats the silk." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Caleb glanced at Dominic, seeking an order. Dominic was leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He didn't wave Sadie off. He didn't even seem to hear him. Sadie stepped around Caleb's massive frame and approached the desk. Up close, The lockbox smelled like old copper pennies and damp pine. The heat radiating from the halogen lamp was intense. He pulled a microfiber rag from his back pocket and knelt, pretending to dab at a scuff mark on the wood floor near the desk's carved legs. His eyes, however, were fixed on the box above him. The 20 experts had focused all their attention on the primary keyhole, a deep, complex cylinder filled with tiny brass pins. They'd scratched the metal around it, trying to pick it, trying to force it. But Sadie's gaze drifted an inch to the right, to the decorative brass rosette molded to look like a blooming lotus. Through the harsh light, he saw the hairline seam running around the petals. A pressure plate. Designed to depress, but completely immobile. He stood up slowly. "You're working on the wrong part." The words slipped out before he could stop them. They sounded absurdly loud in the cavernous room. Dominic's hands dropped from his face. He stared at Sadie, his dark, bloodshot eyes narrowing. The pheromones shifted, confusion, sharp and acrid, cutting through the cedar and gunpowder. His alpha instincts were confused, his brain trying to categorize what he was seeing: a janitor, an omega, a boy in an oversized uniform with messy hair and bleach-stained shoes. "What did you just say?" Dominic asked. The danger in his voice was no longer a dull hum. It was a sharpened blade. "I said you're working on the wrong part." Sadie's throat felt like dry cardboard. He didn't back down, though his heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He pointed at the box. "That keyhole, it's fake. It's a decoy." Caleb let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Right. Okay. The Omega with the mop is an acoustic engineering expert. Boss, I'm getting him out of here." He reached out, his thick fingers grabbing Sadie's upper arm with bruising force. "Don't touch me." Sadie snapped, jerking his arm away. The sudden violence of his reaction surprised even him. His Omega instincts flared, fight, not flight. The chemical burn of his own adrenaline flooded his system, sharp and bitter. He looked at Dominic, holding his gaze. "The keyhole is a decoy. There's no friction wear on the inner pins. Whoever owns this hasn't put a key in there in 50 years. But that decorative lotus flower next to it, it has a micro seam around the petals. It's a pressure plate. It's supposed to depress, but it can't." Dominic slowly stood up. He was tall, dominating the space, moving with a predatory grace despite his exhaustion. He walked over to the desk and looked down at the box, then at Sadie. The alpha scent shifted again, curiosity bleeding through the frustration. "Why can't it?" he asked. "Because it's glued shut." Sadie's voice steadied, finding its rhythm. "Someone spilled cognac or brandy on it decades ago. Mixed with the cigar smoke in this house, the sugar crystallized. It's basically cemented the pressure plate to the outer casing. Your guys were trying to pick a solid block of brass. They could have drilled that keyhole all night, and it would never open." Dominic stared at the brass rosette. He looked back at Sadie. "And how do you know this?" "Because I scrub dried liquor off your baseboards every Tuesday." Sadie's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You drink a lot of brandy in your study, Mr. Rossi." Silence stretched. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the quarter hour. 11:45. "Can you open it?" Dominic asked. "Boss, you can't be serious." Caleb protested. "Miller just said any torque will drop the acid." Dominic ignored him. "Can you open it?" Sadie looked at the $50,000. He didn't want it. He just wanted to prove to the men in this room that they were idiots. He reached into the deep pocket of his apron and pulled out a small plastic spray bottle and a cheap plastic cigarette lighter. "It doesn't need torque," Sadie said. "It needs heat and an acid base to eat the sugar." Before Caleb could draw his weapon, before Dominic could stop him, Sadie unscrewed the cap of his spray bottle. It was undiluted white vinegar, his secret for lifting hard water stains. He poured exactly 3 drops over the brass lotus. The liquid pooled in the microscopic seam. Then he struck the lighter. The small orange flame hovered a 1/4 inch above the brass, directly over the vinegar. The liquid hissed. The smell of boiling vinegar and burnt sugar filled the air, acrid, sharp, overwhelming. Dominic's alpha instincts flared, registering the sudden chemical assault as a potential threat, but he didn't move. Sadie held the flame there for 10 seconds. 20. 30. The brass began to weep, a sticky dark brown sludge as the crystallized resin melted. He clicked the lighter off, wrapped the hem of his thick cotton apron around his thumb to protect it from the hot metal, pressed directly onto the center of the lotus flower, and pushed hard. A loud, resonant clack echoed through the room. Internal latches disengaged like a series of heavy dominoes falling. The heavy brass lid popped open a fraction of an inch, releasing the dry, musty scent of ancient paper into the room. Sadie stepped back, wiping his thumb on his apron. He looked at Dominic. Dominic Rossi was entirely, completely speechless. He stared at the open box, then slowly raised his eyes to the exhausted, bleach-smelling Omega standing in front of him. For the first time in his life, the Alpha had nothing to say. The silence stretched until it became a physical pressure in the room, heavy and suffocating. The grandfather clock ticked a rhythmic metallic pulse that seemed perfectly synced with the throbbing vein at Dominic's temple. He didn't blink. He just stared at the sliver of darkness between the heavy brass lid and the lip of the antique box. Slowly, as if approaching a live explosive, Dominic reached out. His knuckles were white. He pushed the heavy lid back. It shrieked softly on dry hinges, a sound like scraping bone. Inside, resting on a bed of faded moth-eaten velvet, lay a small black leather ledger. It was ordinary, unremarkable. Its edges were frayed, the leather cracked from age and neglect. Yet the air in the room seemed to shift the moment it was exposed, drawing all the oxygen toward that little black book. Dominic picked it up. He didn't open it immediately. He held it in both hands, his broad shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch as a breath he'd been holding for 3 days finally shuddered out of his lungs. The release of tension was palpable, his alpha pheromones shifting from sharp, aggressive frustration to something softer, almost vulnerable. And then his nostrils flared. The Omega scent hit him full force, no longer masked by the bleach and cleaning chemicals. It was sweet, warm, like honey and burnt sugar, with an undertone of something deeply, instinctively compelling. It cut through the lingering cloud of vinegar and burnt resin, and Dominic felt his alpha instinct stir in a way they hadn't in years. His chest tightened. His pulse, steady even in the face of death, stuttered. The beast inside him, the primal part of his nature that he kept caged and controlled, raised its head and took notice. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus on the ledger, on the brother whose life depended on the numbers inside. The Omega was just a janitor. Just a temp. Nothing more. Dominic repeated the words like a mantra, trying to drown out the sudden, fierce urge to step closer, to inhale that scent again, to taste it on his tongue. Caleb. Dominic's voice was a rasp, barely audible over the hum of the halogen work light. Yeah, boss. Caleb's voice was uncharacteristically tight. Call Gabriel. Tell him we have the routing numbers. Tell him to pull the transfer to the cartel account. Immediately. Caleb didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a burner phone from his breast pocket, the scent of peppermint and gun oil flaring briefly as he moved, and stepped out into the dark, cavernous hallway to make the call. Sadie stood by the desk. His thumb stung violently where the hot brass had burned his skin. He curled his fingers inward, hiding the red, blistering mark against the rough cotton of his uniform apron. He didn't look at the ledger. He didn't look at Dominic. He looked at his yellow plastic mop bucket, sitting awkwardly by the Persian rug, the gray water perfectly still. "I need to finish the floors in the East Wing," Sadie said. His voice broke the spell. Dominic snapped his head up. His dark, bloodshot eyes locked onto Sadie, and this time, there was something different in them. Something that made Sadie's Omega instincts flare with warning. The Alpha was looking at him like he was seeing him for the first time. Like he was a puzzle that needed solving. "You want to mop," Dominic stated. It wasn't a question. It was a flat, disbelieving echo. "My shift ends at 2. Sadie's throat tightened. Panic, cold and sharp, was beginning to gnaw at the edges of his stomach. He'd made a mistake. He'd stepped out of the background. Omegas were supposed to be ghosts. Ghosts didn't humiliate highly paid security contractors. Ghosts didn't save Mafia bosses from cartel firing squads. "If I don't finish the East Wing, the staffing agency docks my pay for the entire night." Dominic stared at him. He set the black ledger down on the mahogany desk, right next to the neat, banded stacks of $100 bills. "Take it." Dominic gestured loosely toward the cash. "The bounty. You opened the box. It's yours." Sadie looked at the money. It was more money than he'd ever seen in his life. Neatly stacked, crisp, the pale green ink stark against the dark wood of the desk. To an Omega short on rent, it should have looked like salvation. Instead, it looked like a trap. "No," Sadie said. Dominic's jaw tightened. "Excuse me? I don't want it." Sadie took a step back. His wet shoes squeaked softly on the hardwood. "I just wanted your guy to stop drilling so I could clean the mud and go home. It's $50,000. Dominic's voice dropped an octave, taking on that dangerous quiet edge again. He wasn't used to being told no. He wasn't used to people turning down his money. "You're wearing a uniform held together by safety pins and smelling of industrial bleach. Don't play proud with me. Take the money." Sadie's chest flared with a sudden hot spike of irritation. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion and anger. "I'm not playing proud. I'm playing smart. What exactly do you expect me to do with 50 grand in cash? If I deposit it, the IRS flags it. If I try to pay my rent with a stack of unbundled hundreds, my landlord calls the cops because he thinks I'm dealing. I ride the night bus back to a neighborhood where people get stabbed over a pair of shoes. If I walk out of here with that in my backpack, I'm dead before Tuesday." Dominic went completely still. He studied Sadie. The irritation faded from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, calculating intensity that made Sadie's skin crawl. He was actually looking at him now, not as a janitor, not as a fixture in the room, but as a puzzle. "So you opened a deadlocked vault just to speed up your janitorial duties," Dominic said softly. "Yes." "You're lying." "I'm short on rent." Sadie blurted out. The absolute indignity of the truth tasted like ash in his mouth. He hated Dominic in that moment, hated his tailored suit, his warm scotch, his mahogany desk. "I need $240 by tomorrow morning, or I get evicted. That's what I need. Not your cartel money. Not your ghost money. Just enough to keep my landlord from changing the locks." Dominic reached across the desk. His large, calloused hand bypassed the tall stacks of hundreds entirely. He picked up a loose, unbundled stack resting near his rocks glass. With slow, deliberate movements, he peeled off 3 crisp $100 bills. The thick paper made a dry, rasping sound against his thumb. He held the 3 bills out to Sadie. Sadie didn't move. The ambient hum of the halogen lamp felt deafening. He looked at the green paper, then up at Dominic's face. The dark stubble on the Alpha's jaw caught the harsh light, highlighting the deep, exhausted lines around his mouth. $300, Dominic said. His tone was entirely devoid of mockery. It covers the $240 for your rent, plus cab fare, so you don't have to ride the night bus with cartel money. Sadie hesitated. His burned thumb throbbed. His back ached. He stepped forward, reaching out with his left hand. His fingers brushed Dominic's palm as he took the bills. The Alpha's skin was surprisingly warm, rough with calluses that didn't belong on a man who sat behind a mahogany desk. The brief contact sent a jolt up Sadie's arm, sharp and unsettling. He could feel Dominic's scent shift, the cedar and gunpowder intensifying for just a moment before the Alpha pulled back. Sadie quickly folded the bills and shoved them deep into the front pocket of his damp apron. "Thank you," he muttered, his eyes dropping to the floor. He turned toward the yellow mop bucket, desperate to put distance between them. "What's your name?" Dominic asked. Sadie froze. His hand hovered over the plastic handle of the mop. "You don't need to know that. You just saved my brother's life." Dominic's voice was quiet, but it carried a massive, undeniable weight in the silent room. "I think I've earned a name." "Sadie," he said to the wall. "Sadie." Dominic tested the name, the syllables rolling rough and slow over his tongue. "You're wasting your time scrubbing baseboards. It pays the bills. Usually." Sadie grabbed the mop handle. It was gritty, coated in the dried residue of cheap cleaning chemicals. He yanked the bucket backward, the casters shrieking violently against the wood floor. The heavy oak doors swung open before he could reach them. Caleb stepped back into the study. The massive underboss looked entirely drained, the aggressive posture he usually carried melted out of his shoulders. "It's done," Caleb said, looking directly at Dominic. He ignored Sadie entirely. Gabriel intercepted the transfer. The cartel confirmed receipt. Leo is walking out of the warehouse in Tijuana right now. He's safe. Dominic closed his eyes for a long, slow second. A profound, shuddering relief washed over his features, erasing the predatory edge that had defined him for the last 3 days. When he opened his eyes again, they found Sadie. "Let him go, Caleb," Dominic ordered. Caleb frowned, finally noticing Sadie standing near the door with his bucket. "Boss, he heard too much. He saw the ledger. We can't just let some staffing agency temp walk out the front door. I said let him go." The dangerous edge was back in Dominic's voice, sharp enough to cut glass. "He doesn't know what he saw. And if anyone asks, he was cleaning mud." Caleb shifted his weight, his hand resting near his jacket. He looked at Sadie, his eyes cold and assessing. The scent of peppermint and gun oil intensified, a clear warning. But he stepped aside, leaving the doorway clear. Sadie didn't run, though every nerve ending in his body screamed at him to sprint. He pushed the heavy yellow bucket through the massive oak doors, the plastic wheels thudding over the thick threshold. He walked down the long, dimly lit corridor of the mansion, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of his scuffed shoes. He pushed through the heavy service doors leading to the rear kitchens. Abandoned the bucket by the industrial sinks. He didn't bother going to the east wing. He stripped off the heavy cotton apron, leaving it in a crumpled heap on a stainless steel prep table. The smell of vinegar and burnt sugar still clung to his skin, deeply embedded in the pores of his hands. He walked out the back service door into the biting cold of the November night. The air was sharp, smelling of wet asphalt and distant exhaust, a stark contrast to the stifling, expensive scent of the mansion. Sadie dug his hands into the pockets of his thin thrift store jacket. His fingers brushed against the crisp, stiff edges of the $300 bills. He had his rent. He had a cab ride home. He had survived. He walked down the long asphalt driveway, his shadow stretching long and distorted beneath the yellow glow of the security lights. The gravel crunched under his feet. He told himself he was safe. He told himself that tomorrow, he'd go to the staffing agency, ask for a different route, and never think about the scarred brass lockbox or the exhausted alpha in the tailored suit again. But as he reached the heavy wrought iron security gates at the edge of the property, a sleek black sedan pulled up quietly alongside him. The passenger window rolled down with a soft, mechanical hum. Caleb sat in the driver's seat. He wasn't looking at Sadie. He stared straight ahead at the dark, empty road. "Mr. Rossi doesn't like loose ends," Caleb said, his voice flat. "And he doesn't like people who outsmart his security contractors." He reached across the center console and tossed a small, thick piece of cardstock out the window. It fluttered in the cold air, landing face up on the wet asphalt near Sadie's shoe. "Be at that address tomorrow at noon," Caleb said. "Don't bring them up." The window rolled up. The sedan accelerated, its taillights bleeding red into the darkness before disappearing around the bend. Sadie stood shivering in the cold. He looked down at the wet asphalt. A matte black business card lay near his toe, no name, no logo, just a street address in the financial district and a suite number embossed in dark gray ink. He knew he shouldn't pick it up. Picking it up meant crossing a line he could never uncross. But the smell of vinegar was still on his hands, and the memory of Dominic Rossi's eyes, calculating, seeing right through his invisibility, was burned into his mind. Sadie knelt on the wet ground and picked up the card. Morning arrived with the relentless, hollow hammering of the radiator pipe in the corner of Sadie's studio apartment. The noise was a daily feature, accompanied by the faint metallic scent of rust and boiling dust. He lay on his thin mattress, staring at the ceiling where water stains mapped out continents that didn't exist. His right thumb throbbed, a dull rhythmic burn beneath a cheap plastic bandage. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the heavy brass lid of the lockbox falling open, and felt the sudden, terrifying weight of Dominic Rossi's calculating gaze pinning him to the floorboards. And somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, there was a warmth he couldn't explain, a phantom heat where Dominic's fingers had brushed his palm. By 8 a.m., he was standing in the cramped, sour-smelling hallway of his building, knocking on his landlord's door. Jenkins opened it wearing a stained undershirt, the smell of stale beer and cheap cigars rolling out of his apartment in a visible wave. Sadie didn't speak. He simply handed him the 3 crisp, unbundled $100 bills. Jenkins blinked, his greasy forehead wrinkling as he looked from the money to Sadie's pale, exhausted face. He checked the watermarks, his thick fingers leaving faint, oily smudges on the clean paper, before grunting and shutting the door in Sadie's face. "No receipt. No thank you." Just the sharp click of a deadbolt sliding into place. Sadie walked back to his room. He sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled the matte black business card from the pocket of his thrift store jacket. It was heavy cardstock, expensive. Running his uninjured thumb over the surface, he felt the subtle indentation of the dark gray ink. A street address. A suite number. Noon. He looked at his digital clock, 9:40 a.m. If he went to the staffing agency right now, he could beg for a daytime shift, scrubbing toilets at the municipal courthouse or mopping the sticky floors of a discount cinema. He'd go back to being a ghost. He'd be safe. But his stomach clenched at the thought of the harsh fluorescent lights, the smell of industrial bleach, the aching void in his lower back, and the pathetic realization that next month, he'd be standing in front of Jenkins's door all over again, short on rent, praying for a miracle. He didn't want a miracle. He wanted control. At 10:30, he walked out into the biting November wind. The subway ride downtown was a sensory assault. The train car smelled of damp wool, ozone, and old garlic. Sadie sat stiffly, his hands wedged between his knees, listening to the agonizing screech of metal wheels against the tracks. He watched the people around him, tired commuters staring blankly at their phones, avoiding eye contact, existing in their own isolated bubbles. Yesterday, he'd been exactly like them. Today, the $300 in his pocket felt like a severing of a tether. He was drifting into dangerous waters, and he knew exactly how fast the current was moving. He emerged from the underground station into the financial district. The contrast was physically jarring. Here, the buildings were sheer cliffs of glass and steel, slicing into the gray winter sky. The wind whipping off the river was colder here, funneled through the concrete canyons with a sharp, howling intensity. There was no trash on the sidewalks. No grime. Everything was polished, sleek, and fiercely intimidating. Sadie found the address. It was a towering skyscraper with a lobby clad in imported black marble. It looked less like an office building and more like a mausoleum for hedge funds. He pushed through the heavy revolving doors, instantly enveloped by the scent of expensive HVAC systems and faint citrus-infused floor wax. He approached the security desk. The guard, a beta in a sharp suit with an earpiece, looked up, his eyes doing a quick, professional sweep of Sadie's faded jacket, his scuffed shoes, his messy hair. He opened his mouth to ask for a delivery slip, clearly assuming Sadie was a courier who'd lost his way. "Suite 4400, Sadie said. His voice was dry and raspy. The guard frowned, typing something into his terminal. He paused. He looked back up at Sadie, the mild annoyance in his eyes replaced by sudden, rigid professionalism. "Name?" "Sadie." The guard didn't ask for a last name. He didn't ask for ID. He simply reached under his desk and pulled out a blank white magnetic key card. He slid it across the polished granite counter. "Express elevator bank on the left. Last car. It'll take you straight up." Sadie took the card. The plastic was cool against his skin. He walked toward the elevators, his scuffed rubber soles squeaking faintly against the marble, a tiny sound, a microscopic rebellion against the oppressive silence of the lobby. He stepped into the polished chrome box, swiped the card, and felt his stomach drop as the elevator shot upward, carrying him away from the ground, away from the dirt, and straight into the stratosphere of Dominic Rossi's world. 44 floors above the chaotic churn of the city, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of expensive, engineered quiet that made Sadie's ears ring. The elevator doors parted with a soft pneumatic hiss, revealing a reception area devoid of a receptionist. Instead, Caleb stood by a massive floor-to-ceiling window, his broad shoulders blocking out a significant portion of the skyline. He wore a different suit today, charcoal gray, impeccably tailored, but the faint underlying scent of peppermint and gun oil remained the same. He turned as Sadie stepped off the elevator. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a greeting. He just gave Sadie a slow, assessing look, as if searching for a weapon hidden in the oversized pockets of his jacket. "He's waiting," Caleb rumbled, gesturing toward a set of heavy frosted glass doors at the end of a short corridor. Sadie didn't wait for him to lead the way. He walked past him, ignoring the instinct to shrink away from his sheer physical mass. He pushed open the glass doors and stepped into the main office. The room was vast, smelling of rich espresso and old leather. There were no bookshelves or antique lockboxes here. The space was hyper-modern, dominated by a massive live-edge walnut desk and panoramic views of the river. Dominic sat behind the desk. He looked different in the daylight. The crushing exhaustion that had weighed him down the previous night was gone, replaced by a coiled, electric energy. He was clean-shaven, dressed in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with lean muscle. The pale scars at his collarbone were visible above the open collar, faint reminders of a violent past. He was looking at a sleek tablet, a half-empty espresso cup resting near his hand. He didn't look up immediately. He let Sadie stand there, letting the sheer scale of the room and his absolute authority wash over him. Sadie refused to fidget. He crossed his arms over his chest, digging his fingernails into the fabric of his jacket, and waited. Finally, Dominic tapped the screen of his tablet and raised his dark eyes. They locked onto Sadie's, sharp, unreadable. And then, almost imperceptibly, Dominic's nostrils flared. His alpha instincts were cataloging Sadie's scent again, the faint sweetness beneath the lingering bleach, the subtle shift of stress pheromones. Something flickered in his gaze, too quick to identify. The alpha leaned back in his chair, and Sadie caught the way his fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the armrest. "You didn't bring them up," Dominic noted. His voice was smooth, devoid of the dangerous rasp from the night before. "You told me not to." Sadie kept his tone perfectly flat. "Though, looking at the streaks on your windows, your window washers are using too much ammonia in their solution. It leaves a film." A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of Dominic's mouth. It was gone a second later. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Have a seat, Sadie." Sadie walked forward and sat in one of the low, uncomfortable designer chairs opposite his desk. The leather was cold. "You're wondering why you're here," Dominic said. "I'm assuming you didn't call me up here to ask for cleaning advice." "I have 3 forensic accountants on retainer," Dominic began, ignoring Sadie's dry remark. "I pay them exorbitant amounts of money to look at spreadsheets, bank routing numbers, and tax codes. For the last 6 months, one of my front companies, a high-end restaurant in Midtown, has been bleeding cash. A slow, steady hemorrhage. My accountants assure me the books are perfect. My security team assures me the vault is secure. The managers are loyal. Yet the money is vanishing." Sadie frowned. The internal contradiction of his statement caught his attention. "If the books are perfect, how do you know it's bleeding?" "Because I know how much liquor they pour, and I know how many steaks they order." Dominic's voice dropped into a low, deadly register. "The physical reality doesn't match the digital one. Someone is skimming. And they are doing it with such precision that my experts can't find the hole in the bucket." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the walnut desk. The intensity radiating from him was palpable, a physical force that pressed against Sadie's chest. The alpha scent deepened, cedar and gunpowder mingling with something warmer. "Last night, I watched 20 of the best security engineers in the country stare at a brass box and tell me it was impossible. They looked at the mechanics. They looked at the design. They missed the crystallized sugar because they don't know what dirt looks like. You do." Sadie felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "You want me to look at your restaurant? I want you to get hired as a night cleaner. I want you to be invisible. I want you to walk through the kitchens, the stock rooms, the manager's office. I want you to look at the trash, the wear patterns on the floor, the inventory that doesn't smell right. You see the things people try to wipe away. I need you to find my leak. I'm a janitor." Sadie's voice was tight. "I clean up mud. I don't hunt down thieves for the Mafia. You're an analyst who uses a mop." Dominic fired back smoothly. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick white envelope. He tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy, substantial thud. $10,000. Just to look. If you find the leak, I'll multiply it by 5. You'll never have to worry about a landlord or a late bus again." Sadie stared at the white envelope. The smell of espresso in the room suddenly felt nauseatingly rich. $50,000. Real money this time. Clean money. But the price was stepping entirely out of the shadows and into the crosshairs of whoever was brave enough to steal from Dominic Rossi. He looked up from the envelope, meeting Dominic's dark, unwavering gaze. He knew he should walk away. The survival instinct that had kept him alive on the streets screamed at him to run. But his burned thumb ached in rhythm with his heartbeat, and the memory of Jenkins's door slamming in his face was still fresh. And beneath all of it, there was something else, a treacherous pull toward the alpha who had looked at him like he mattered. Sadie reached across the desk and pulled the envelope toward him. The crisp edges of the thick paper bit into his palm. He didn't open it. He didn't need to count it to know the weight of $10,000. It felt dangerously heavy, a dense anchor threatening to drag him straight to the bottom of the river. "I start tonight," Sadie said. His voice was steady, a stark contrast to the frantic, irregular hammering of his heart against his ribs. Dominic didn't smile, but a shadow of approval shifted in his dark eyes. He picked up his tablet, dismissing Sadie with the seamless grace of a man who owned the world and everyone in it. "Caleb will give you the address. Don't be late. And Sadie." He paused, looking back up, his gaze catching the harsh midday light pouring through the glass. His eyes swept over Sadie slowly, deliberately, from the scuffed shoes to the messy hair and back again. Something possessive flickered in their depths. "Don't get caught." By midnight, the air inside Aurora, Dominic Rossi's flagship restaurant in Midtown, smelled of bruised basil, charred wagyu fat, and the sharp, sour tang of spilled champagne. The dinner rush had ended hours ago. The sous chefs had wiped down their stations. The floor managers had locked the registers. And the echoing, cavernous space belonged entirely to the night crew. Sadie wore a new uniform. It wasn't held together by safety pins, but it was just as shapeless, a stiff, dark blue polyester tunic that scratched mercilessly at his collarbone. The fabric smelled faintly of formaldehyde from the factory wrapping. He pushed a heavy gray industrial utility cart down the narrow hallway connecting the main kitchen to the rear loading dock. His cover was perfect, a staffing agency temp assigned to cover a sudden vacancy. Trent, the polished, perpetually sweating general manager of Aurora, had barely looked at him when he arrived. He'd pointed a manicured finger toward the utility closet, muttered something about not using abrasive pads on the imported marble bar, and walked away. To Trent and the remaining kitchen prep staff, Sadie was a ghost. He was a mop, a rag, a bucket of degreaser. He was the invisible machinery that reset their world for the next day. Sadie used that invisibility. He started in the main dining room. He didn't look for hidden safes or USB drives. He looked at the physical footprint of the room. Forensic accountants looked at numbers on a screen. Sadie looked at the dust under the wine racks. He noticed that the digital inventory manifest pinned to the stockroom clipboard claimed 40 bottles of a specific vintage Bordeaux had been sold that week. Yet when Sadie emptied the glass recycling bins, separating the clear from the green, he counted the corks and the heavy, punted bottoms of the broken bottles. There were only 22. A digital ledger could be hacked, manipulated, or balanced with phantom numbers. But glass was physical. It took up space. It had weight. He moved to the kitchen, his scuffed rubber soles silent on the red quarry tile. The massive stainless steel prep tables gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Sadie wiped them down with a mixture of hot water and quaternary sanitizer, the chemical smell burning the inside of his nose. He watched the people who lingered, the prep cook who stayed an hour past his shift, supposedly deep cleaning the meat slicer but spending more time glancing toward the walk-in refrigerator. The loading dock security guard who spent exactly 14 minutes every night in the alleyway smoking a cigarette, leaving the heavy steel service doors propped open with a rubber wedge. But it wasn't until 2 a.m., when he reached the narrow corridor housing the commercial laundry bins, that the physical reality of the theft snapped into focus. Aurora used a premium linen service. The tablecloths and napkins were heavy Egyptian cotton. At the end of the night, the busboys stripped the dining room and shoved the soiled linens into massive wheeled canvas hampers near the back exit, waiting for the morning truck. Sadie sprayed a rag with stainless steel polish and began wiping the exterior of the walk-in freezer door, positioning himself so he could see the hampers in the reflection of the polished metal. Trent emerged from his glass-walled office. He'd taken off his suit jacket. His tie was loose. He didn't look like a man finishing a shift, he looked like a man executing a quiet, stressful task. He walked quickly down the hall, looking over his shoulder. He bypassed the kitchen entirely and went straight to the walk-in refrigerator. He emerged a minute later pushing a small utility cart. On it sat 3 large, opaque white plastic tubs, the kind used for storing bulk rendering fat. Sadie kept his head down, scrubbing a non-existent stain on the freezer handle. His pulse hammered a dry rhythm against his collarbone. Trent didn't take the tubs to the waste disposal chute. He pushed the cart directly to the heavy canvas linen hampers. With practiced, frantic efficiency, he unlatched the lids of the white tubs. Even from 15 feet away, Sadie recognized the dark, marbled brick of vacuum-sealed A5 Wagyu beef and the unmistakable, earthy heavy scent of raw white truffles piercing through the smell of bleach. Trent buried the sealed packages deep into the center of the soiled linens, piling wine-stained napkins and heavy tablecloths over the stolen inventory. He wasn't hacking a bank account. He wasn't skimming the register. He was hiding tens of thousands of dollars of premium, untraceable ingredients in the dirty laundry. The linen company truck would pick up the hampers at 5 a.m., bypassing security entirely because nobody checks the dirty napkins. The truck driver, clearly paid off, would divert the goods to the black market before delivering the actual laundry to the cleaners. The digital inventory would simply log the missing food as kitchen spoilage or prep waste. Sadie lowered his rag. The chemical burn in his nose faded, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of realization. Dominic Rossi's 20 experts had failed because they were looking up at the data. They should have been looking down at the dirt. Fluorescent lights hummed a sickening yellow pitch in the empty dining room of Aurora. It was 4:15 a.m. The street sweepers were rumbling down the avenue outside, their heavy brushes vibrating the thick plate glass windows. Dominic Rossi sat alone in a curved leather booth in the darkest corner of the restaurant. He wore a heavy wool overcoat over a dark sweater, blending seamlessly into the shadows. He didn't have an espresso this time. A single rocks glass of amber liquid sat untouched on the pristine white linen tablecloth in front of him. He'd received the text message from an untraceable burner phone 20 minutes ago. Just an address and a time. The heavy oak doors swinging into the kitchen pushed open with a soft sigh. Sadie walked out into the dining room. He was still wearing the stiff dark blue polyester uniform, but he'd taken off his apron. His hair was pulled back into a messy utilitarian knot, strands sticking to his forehead with dried sweat. He looked exhausted, his shoulders carrying the heavy, familiar ache of a 10-hour shift on hard quarry tile. The dark circles under his eyes were almost purple in the harsh light. He didn't approach Dominic with the hesitant, terrified deference of his subordinates. He walked with a flat, heavy-footed pragmatism. In his left hand, he dragged a large, heavy industrial black trash bag. It made a sickening wet scraping sound against the imported hardwood floor. Dominic's eyes tracked the bag. A muscle feathered along his jawline. His alpha instinct stirred, catching the faint undercurrent of Sadie's scent beneath the bleach and sweat, still sweet, still warm, but tinged now with something sharper. Adrenaline. Triumph. The alpha's fingers curled around the rock's glass, knuckles whitening. Sadie reached the booth. He didn't sit. He hoisted the heavy black bag with a sharp grunt of effort and dropped it directly onto the center of the pristine table. The heavy crystal rock's glass rattled. The fine Egyptian cotton tablecloth instantly absorbed a dark, wet stain from the bottom of the plastic bag. Dominic's scotch sloshed but didn't spill. He'd set it down just in time. "What is this?" Dominic asked. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that barely disturbed the quiet of the room. He looked at the leaking bag, then slowly up to Sadie's face. "That," Sadie said, his breathing slightly uneven, "is your leak." He reached out, his fingers digging into the tough plastic, and ripped a massive tear down the side of the bag. The pungent, earthy smell of white truffles exploded into the stale air, immediately clashing with the scent of Dominic's scotch. Mixed with the truffles were heavy vacuum-sealed bricks of premium Wagyu beef, 4 bottles of vintage Romanée-Conti wine, and 2 large unmarked tins of beluga caviar. All of it was tangled up in a heap of wine-stained dirty napkins and damp tablecloths. Dominic didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He simply stared at the pile of raw fortune sitting in the middle of his elegant dining room. He reached out, his large calloused hand brushing past a stained napkin to pick up one of the heavy bricks of meat. He looked at the inventory barcodes stamped on the plastic. "They log it as spoilage in the computer," Sadie explained. His voice was devoid of triumph. He sounded like he was reading a weather report. "Or they claim the wine bottles were dropped and broken during service. The digital books balance perfectly because the system is told the product is gone. But it doesn't go in the dumpster is checked by your security guards." Dominic set the meat down slowly. "The linen service. Trent packs the hampers at 2 a.m. Sadie confirmed, crossing his arms over his chest to hide the slight tremor in his hands. "The dirty laundry goes out the back door at 5 a.m. Security waves the truck right through. Nobody inspects a 200-pound canvas cart full of sour-smelling wet towels. The driver drops the food at a secondary location before heading to the industrial cleaners. Trent is skimming $30,000 of physical product a week. Right past your cameras." Silence fell over the table. The only sound was the distant wail of a siren bleeding through the thick windows. Dominic pulled a crisp white handkerchief from his overcoat pocket and methodically wiped the condensation and raw meat residue from his fingers. He didn't look angry. If anything, the deep exhausted lines around his eyes seemed to ease, replaced by a cold, terrifying focus. "My accountant spent 6 months running algorithms to find a phantom bank account," Dominic murmured, almost to himself. He tossed the soiled handkerchief onto the pile of stolen goods. "And you found it in 4 hours. Your accountants don't know what it feels like to haul 50 pounds of wet linen," Sadie said flatly. "They don't know the physical weight of things. When you spend your life cleaning up after people, you learn that nobody ever looks at the trash. It's the ultimate blind spot." Dominic finally looked up at him. The dynamic in the air shifted, heavy and electric. He wasn't looking at a janitor anymore. He wasn't looking at a temporary asset. He was looking at an Omega who understood the ugly, grinding mechanics of reality better than anyone on his payroll. "Trent is a dead man," Dominic said casually. Stating a fact rather than making a threat. "The linen driver won't make it to sunrise." Sadie's stomach plummeted. The brutal reality of Dominic's world crashed through the satisfaction of solving the puzzle. He'd just signed Trent's death warrant. He swallowed hard, tasting the bitter tang of ozone and stale adrenaline. "That's your business," Sadie said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He took a step back. "I did the job. I found the leak. We're done." "Are we?" Dominic asked. He stood up slowly. He was a foot taller than Sadie, his presence utterly dominating the space. He didn't move toward the Omega, but the sheer gravity of his posture made Sadie feel pinned to the floor. Dominic's scent flared, cedar and gunpowder, sharp and intense. His alpha instincts were fully engaged, cataloging every micro-expression, every shift in Sadie's body language. The air between them thickened, charged with something that had nothing to do with the stolen meat. He reached into the inner pocket of his overcoat and pulled out a thick, banded stack of $100 bills. Not an envelope this time, just raw, unhidden cash. $50,000. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud next to the ruined truffles. You think this is the only blind spot I have, Sadie? Dominic's voice dropped into a register that felt intimately dangerous. My world is full of experts who only see what they're trained to see. They look at the ceiling. They never look at the floor. Sadie stared at the money. It was enough to move to a different city. Enough to disappear. But looking into Dominic Rossi's eyes, he knew the terrifying truth: you couldn't disappear from an alpha who knew exactly how to look in the shadows. He had stepped out of the background. And now Dominic was never going to let him return to it. $50,000 sat on the ruined Egyptian cotton, resting against a leaking package of raw beef and a mound of damp, sour-smelling napkins. Sadie stared at the thick paper band holding the hundreds together. It didn't look like salvation anymore. It looked exactly like a heavy, perfectly fitted iron collar. Dominic didn't crowd him. He remained on his side of the table, his hands slipped casually into the pockets of his heavy wool overcoat. The faint high-pitched whine of a street sweeper making its second pass outside vibrated through the thick plate glass, rattling the empty crystal rocks glass a fraction of an inch. I don't want to work for you, Sadie said. His voice cracked on the final word. His throat felt coated in dust and dried bleach. The scent of him shifted, fear, yes, but something else too. Something that made his Omega instincts war with his rational mind. Everyone works for me, Sadie. Dominic's voice was soft. Most of them just don't know it. The staffing agency that docks your pay, I own. The shell corporation that signs their lease, I own. The landlord you paid this morning, he pays protection money to my lieutenants so his building doesn't burn down. You've been living in my house your whole life. I'm just inviting you into the dining room. Sadie dragged his gaze away from the cash and looked at Dominic. The sheer suffocating scale of his reach pressed down on his lungs. He dug his fingernails into the rough polyester of his uniform tunic, a cheap synthetic material that trapped his body heat and chafed against his collarbone. I found your stolen meat, Sadie said, his chest heaving with shallow, irregular breaths. I proved your point. You can hire 20 new security firms to watch the floor instead of the ceiling. You don't need a janitor. I don't need a janitor. Dominic agreed, pulling his hands from his pockets. He stepped out of the shadow of the booth, the harsh fluorescent lighting catching the sharp angles of his face. I need an auditor who understands the physical reality of dirt. My accountants look at spreadsheets and see numbers that balance. My enforcers look at men like Trent and see fear, assuming it means loyalty. They are all blinded by their own expertise. He gestured toward the rotting pile of luxury goods on the table. You walked into my flagship restaurant, a place designed to overwhelm the senses, and you ignored the marble, you ignored the wine lists. You looked at the trash. You counted the broken glass. You noticed the wear patterns. Dominic took a slow step closer. The scent of his expensive, dry cedar cologne pushed back against the overwhelming odor of white truffles. His alpha pheromones wrapped around Sadie like a silk cord, not aggressive, not demanding, but inescapable. You see the seams where the world actually holds together. And more importantly, you see where it's fraying. Sadie took a step back. His scuffed rubber shoe squeaked violently against the hardwood. His back hit the edge of a nearby table, halting his retreat. Panic, cold and sharp, coiled in his stomach. He thought of Trent sweating in the back office, completely unaware that the heavy canvas laundry carts he'd packed 2 hours ago were currently sealing his fate. "You're going to kill him," Sadie whispered. "Yes." Dominic didn't blink. He didn't offer a justification or a comfortable lie. "Trent stole from my family. He broke the fundamental rule of our ecosystem. Consequences in my world are not conceptual. They are physical. And they are final." Sadie swallowed hard. A wave of nausea hit him, hot and acidic. He closed his eyes for a brief second, trying to block out the sight of the raw marbled meat and the stack of cartel money. He was a boy who scrubbed baseboards. He took the night bus. He worried about eviction notices and the fluctuating price of eggs. He had no business standing in the crosshairs of a mafia execution. But as he opened his eyes, he realized the terrifying truth. The old world was already gone. Jenkins, his landlord, had taken the $300 without a word, but he'd be back on the first of the month, drunk and demanding more. The staffing agency would send him to another fluorescent-lit hallway, to ruin his knees for minimum wage. That life was a slow, grinding death. Dominic Rossi was offering a different kind of death. But at least this one paid up front. The heavy oak doors to the kitchen swung open. Caleb stepped into the dining room. He stopped abruptly, his massive frame going perfectly still as his eyes fell on the table. He looked at the leaking trash bag, the vacuum-sealed Wagyu, the truffles, and finally the $50,000. He didn't ask a single question. His raw intelligence processed the scene in 3 seconds. He looked at Sadie, and for the first time since he'd met him, the condescension in his eyes was completely gone. It was replaced by a cold, guarded respect. "Boss." Caleb rumbled, keeping his voice low. The linen truck just pulled into the alley. Dominic didn't look at his underboss. His dark eyes remained locked on Sadie. "Handle the driver. Send a crew to Trent's apartment. Don't make a mess." "Understood." Caleb turned and disappeared back through the swinging doors. Sadie flinched at the casual administration of violence. It was an invoice being processed, a line item being crossed out. His body was trembling, adrenaline wearing off and leaving only exhaustion and something else, something that felt terrifyingly like fascination. "Pick it up, Sadie." Dominic's voice dropped into a quiet, absolute command. But there was something else beneath the command, something almost gentle. Sadie stood frozen for a long moment. His burned thumb throbbed beneath the cheap plastic bandage. His lower back ached with the familiar dull pain of a 10-hour shift. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out. His fingers brushed the damp, wine-stained cotton of the tablecloth as he grabbed the thick stack of bills. The paper was cold. It was heavy. He shoved it deep into the pocket of his cheap jacket. "I need a different uniform," Sadie said. His voice was flat and entirely drained of emotion. "This polyester gives me a rash." A faint, dangerous smile finally broke across Dominic's face. His alpha pheromones shifted, no longer aggressive, no longer commanding. Something softer, almost possessive, bled through the cedar and gunpowder. It was the scent of satisfaction, of a hunter who had finally caught his quarry. "I'll make sure you get one." Sadie opened his mouth to reply, something sharp, something defiant, but the words died in his throat. Dominic had moved closer without him noticing. The alpha was right there, close enough that Sadie could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the faint scar slicing through his eyebrow, could count the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "Sadie." Dominic's voice was barely a whisper. "I've been in this business for 20 years. I've seen a lot of things. I've met a lot of people. But I've never met anyone like you." His hand came up, slow and deliberate, giving Sadie every opportunity to pull away. Sadie didn't. Dominic's fingers brushed against his jaw, calloused and warm, tilting his face up. The touch was featherlight, almost reverent. You see things no one else sees, Dominic continued. His thumb traced along Sadie's cheekbone, leaving a trail of heat. You walk into a room full of men who would kill without blinking, and you don't flinch. You solve problems that stumped the best minds in the city. And you do it all while smelling like bleach and exhaustion. Sadie's breath hitched. That's not. Let me finish. Dominic's voice was low, intimate, meant only for Sadie's ears. I've been looking for someone like you my whole life. Someone who isn't afraid of the dirt. Someone who understands that the real answers are always in the places people ignore. I thought I'd never find that person. And then you walked into my study with a mop and a bottle of vinegar and changed everything. His other hand came up, cradling Sadie's face between his palms. The position was intimate, vulnerable. Sadie could feel the steady thrum of Dominic's pulse through his fingertips, could smell the alpha scent intensifying, wrapping around him like a blanket. I'm not just offering you a job, Dominic said. I'm offering you something more. Something I've never offered anyone. What? Sadie's voice cracked. Dominic leaned in. His lips brushed against Sadie's forehead, soft and warm. Then his cheek. Then the corner of his mouth. Each touch was a question, asking for permission, waiting for Sadie to pull away. Sadie didn't pull away. I'm offering you everything, Dominic breathed against his skin. My protection. My loyalty. My heart. If you'll have it. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Sadie's Omega instincts were screaming at him, a jumble of fear and desire and something that felt terrifyingly like hope. He'd spent his whole life being invisible, being nothing, being a ghost in a world that didn't want him. And now this alpha, this powerful, dangerous, devastating alpha, was looking at him like he was the most precious thing in the universe. Why me? Sadie whispered. Dominic pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. His gaze was intense, burning. Because you opened a lockbox that 20 experts couldn't crack. Because you found a thief that my accountants couldn't catch. Because you looked at me, really looked at me, and you didn't flinch. You saw a man, not a monster. And you saw the dirt, not because you wanted to find it, but because you understand that it's a part of life. You understand that everything is connected, that nothing exists in isolation. That's rare, Sadie. That's so incredibly rare. His thumb brushed over Sadie's lower lip, featherlight. And because when I caught your scent for the first time, something in me recognized something in you. I know that sounds like madness. But it's the truth. You're not just someone I want to work for me. You're someone I want to keep. Someone I want to claim. Someone I want to protect with my last breath. Sadie's heart was pounding so hard he was certain Dominic could feel it through the air between them. His Omega instincts were screaming at him to submit, to yield, to let this alpha take care of him. But his rational mind, battered and exhausted, still had one last protest. You kill people, Sadie said. You're a monster. Yes. Dominic didn't look away. I am. And I won't pretend otherwise. But I kill to protect what's mine. I kill because the world is brutal, and if I don't do what needs to be done, the people I love will suffer. That's who I am, Sadie. That's the life I live. And if you choose to be part of that life, I will never, ever let anyone hurt you. Not by my hand, not by anyone else's. He was so close now. So close that Sadie could feel the heat of his breath against his lips. So close that all he had to do was close the distance. I'm scared, Sadie admitted. I'm so scared. I know. Dominic's voice was infinitely gentle. So am I. I've never been scared of anything in my life. But I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared that you'll walk out that door and I'll never see you again. His lips brushed against Sadie's, the barest contact, a question. Please don't go. Please stay. Sadie closed his eyes. He thought about his empty apartment, his aching back, the endless grind of a life spent invisible. He thought about the way Dominic had looked at him, like he mattered, like he was seen, like he was valued. He opened his eyes. Okay, he whispered. Dominic kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, like the alpha was afraid of breaking him. His lips were warm and dry, moving against Sadie's with a gentle reverence that made Sadie's knees weak. But then Sadie made a small sound, a whimper, barely audible, and something in Dominic shifted. The kiss deepened. Dominic's hand slid into Sadie's hair, tilting his head back, claiming his mouth with a hunger that stole Sadie's breath. The scent of cedar and gunpowder intensified, wrapping around Sadie, flooding his senses. He could taste the hint of scotch on Dominic's tongue, the faint sharpness of espresso. It was intoxicating. Sadie's hands found their way to Dominic's chest, gripping the wool of his overcoat. He could feel the steady thump of the alpha's heart beneath his palms, could feel the heat radiating off his body. It was overwhelming, all-consuming, and Sadie never wanted it to end. Dominic pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against Sadie's. Both of them were breathing hard, their scents tangling together in the empty dining room, cedar and bleach, gunpowder and honey, a heady mixture that made Sadie's head spin. You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that, Dominic murmured. Sadie laughed, a short, breathless sound. You've known me for less than 24 hours. 24 hours too long. Dominic pressed a kiss to his cheek, then his jaw, then the sensitive spot behind his ear. I'm a decisive man, Sadie. When I see something I want, I don't wait. And what do you want? Sadie asked, his voice shaking. Dominic pulled back, meeting his eyes. His gaze was intense, burning with a fire that made Sadie's omega instincts sing. Everything, he said simply. I want everything with you. Your loyalty. Your trust. Your laughter. Your anger. Your frustration. Your joy. I want to wake up next to you. I want to fall asleep with your scent around me. I want to protect you, to provide for you, to make sure you never have to worry about anything ever again. He cupped Sadie's face in his hands again, thumbs stroking over his cheekbones. I want to claim you, Sadie. Not because you're an omega and I'm an alpha. But because you're you. Because every moment I've spent with you has made me feel more alive than I've felt in years. Because I'm already yours, and I want you to be mine. Sadie's throat was tight, his eyes burning with tears he refused to shed. I don't know how to be wanted, he admitted. I've never been wanted. Then let me show you. Dominic pressed a kiss to his forehead. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you. Start with tonight. Come home with me. Let me take care of you. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just want you close. Sadie hesitated. The rational part of his brain was still screaming warnings, still cataloging all the ways this could go wrong. But the rest of him, the exhausted, lonely, desperate part of him, wanted this. Wanted him. Yes, Sadie said. Okay. Dominic smiled, a real smile, not the dangerous smirk or the cold mask. It transformed his face, making him look younger, softer, almost boyish. Good boy. He pressed a kiss to Sadie's lips. Let's go home. The penthouse was everything Sadie had imagined and nothing like it. It was sprawling, modern, all clean lines and warm wood and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the sleeping city. But it was also messy, a jacket draped over the back of a chair, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table, a book face down on the couch. "Make yourself at home," Dominic said, shrugging off his overcoat and draping it over a chair. "I'll get you something comfortable to wear." Sadie stood in the middle of the living room, feeling impossibly out of place. His scuffed shoes looked ridiculous against the polished hardwood. His cheap uniform felt like a costume. But Dominic didn't seem to care. He returned a few moments later with a soft gray shirt and a pair of drawstring pants. "These might be too big," Dominic said, handing them over. "But they're comfortable. There's a bathroom down the hall to the left. Take your time." Sadie took the clothes. The fabric was impossibly soft, expensive in a way his thrift store jackets would never be. He retreated to the bathroom, stripped off his stiff polyester uniform, and stood in front of the mirror for a long moment. He looked tired. He looked young. He looked scared. And underneath the fear, there was something else. Something that felt terrifyingly like hope. He pulled on Dominic's clothes. They were too big, the shirt falling past his hips, the pants pooling around his ankles. But they smelled like the alpha, cedar and gunpowder, warm and comforting. Sadie inhaled deeply, letting the scent wrap around him like a blanket. When he emerged from the bathroom, Dominic was standing by the windows, looking out at the city. He'd taken off his shirt, and the sight made Sadie's breath catch. The alpha's body was a map of scars, a long white line across his ribs, a puckered mark on his shoulder, a jagged scar on his side that looked like it had been made by a knife. His muscles were lean and defined, the body of a man who'd survived violence and learned to use it. "Sadie." Dominic turned, his gaze sweeping over the Omega. He smiled, soft and warm. "You look good." "I look like a kid wearing his father's clothes." "You look like you're wearing my clothes," Dominic corrected. "And I like it." He crossed the room, reaching out to tug gently at the collar of the shirt. "Mine." The word sent a shiver down Sadie's spine. "What does that mean?" he asked. "What does this mean?" Dominic's hands came up to cup his face, tilting it back. His touch was gentle, but his gaze was intense. "It means you're not alone anymore. It means I will protect you, provide for you, cherish you. It means I will kill anyone who tries to hurt you. It means you're my priority, my partner, my Omega." He pressed a soft kiss to Sadie's forehead. "It means you're mine, and I'm yours. That's what it means." Sadie closed his eyes, letting himself sink into the words. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. But it was also the first time in his life he'd ever felt like he belonged. "What if I mess up?" he asked. "What if I'm not what you need?" Dominic laughed softly. "You could never mess up. And you're already exactly what I need." His lips brushed against Sadie's, a soft, reassuring kiss. "Stop worrying. I'm not going anywhere." Sadie wrapped his arms around Dominic's waist, pressing his face into the alpha's chest. The skin was warm, the heartbeat steady. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt safe. "Stay with me tonight," Dominic murmured into his hair. "Just sleep. Nothing else. I just want you close." "Yes," Sadie said. "I want that too." They fell into bed together, tangled in each other's arms. Dominic held him close, his face pressed into the curve of Sadie's neck, breathing in his scent. The Omega's pheromones had softened, no longer sharp with fear and exhaustion, but warm and sweet and content. "Mine," Dominic whispered against his skin. "My beautiful, brilliant Omega." Sadie shivered, pressing closer. "Say it again." Mine. Dominic pressed a kiss to his neck, just below his jaw. All mine. The bond was already forming, already knitting them together, the first tentative threads of a connection that would only grow stronger with time. Sadie could feel it, a warmth spreading through his chest, a sense of rightness that he'd never experienced before. I've never felt anything like this, he admitted. Is it always like this? Only with the right person. Dominic stroked his back, tracing the line of his spine. Only when it's real. They lay together in the darkness, the city humming beneath them, the stars hidden behind clouds. Dominic's breathing eventually evened out, the alpha falling asleep with his arms still wrapped around Sadie. But Sadie stayed awake, his mind churning. He thought about Trent, whose life was ending tonight. He thought about the linen driver, whose life had already ended. He thought about the world he'd just stepped into, a world of violence and loyalty and love, all tangled together in ways he was only beginning to understand. He thought about Dominic Rossi, the monster, the killer, the alpha who had looked at him like he was worth everything. And he thought about the future, uncertain and terrifying and full of possibility. The days that followed were a blur of discovery. Sadie uncovered the counterfeit scheme in less than a week, tracing it back to a mid-level logistics manager who'd been skimming shipments for months. Dominic's enforcers handled the man personally, and Sadie tried not to think about what that handling entailed. He tried, and he failed. But Dominic was there to distract him, to pull him away from the darkness, to remind him why he'd chosen this life. They spent hours together, talking about nothing and everything, discovering each other in ways that had nothing to do with the shadows of the underworld. Dominic took him shopping for clothes that actually fit. He took him to quiet dinners in restaurants where the staff knew not to stare. He took him to the opera, Sadie's first time, and watched him with undisguised adoration as the music washed over him. And in the quiet moments, when the world fell away and it was just the two of them, Sadie began to understand what Dominic had meant. He was wanted. He was seen. He was loved. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was everything he'd never dared to hope for. One night, weeks later, they stood on the balcony of Dominic's penthouse, the city spread out beneath them like a glittering jewel. The winter air was cold, but Dominic's arm was warm around Sadie's shoulders, and his scent was a steady, grounding presence. I never thought I'd have this, Sadie said quietly. Someone who sees me. Who wants me for who I am, not what I can do for them. You've always been more than what you do. Dominic pressed a kiss to the top of Sadie's head. You just needed someone to show you. Sadie leaned into him, letting himself be held. He could still smell the faint trace of blood on Dominic's clothes, the lingering evidence of the world they inhabited. But underneath it, there was something else, something sweet and warm and achingly human. I'm scared, Sadie admitted. Of this. Of us. Of what happens next. I know. Dominic's arms tightened around him. I'm scared too. But I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. Sadie looked up at him, meeting his dark, steady gaze. And for the first time in his life, he believed it. A cheap lighter. A bottle of vinegar. An eye for the dirt nobody else wanted to see. Sadie stepped out of the shadows to pay his rent, and he ended up exposing a massive theft, saving a life, and catching the eye of the city's most dangerous alpha. Now he's no longer scrubbing floors, he's Dominic Rossi's secret weapon, his partner, his Omega. But in a world where mistakes are paid for in blood, how long can he survive before he becomes the mess that needs cleaning? He didn't know. But for the first time, he wasn't facing it alone. Dominic cupped Sadie's face in his hands, tilting it up to meet his gaze. You're not going anywhere, he said again. Not now. Not ever. And anyone who tries to take you from me will learn what it means to cross a Rossi. His alpha instincts flared, possessive, protective, fierce. The scent of cedar and gunpowder intensified, wrapping around Sadie like a shield. And Sadie, despite everything, felt safe. "I trust you," he whispered. Dominic kissed him then, deep and slow and full of promise. His hands slid into Sadie's hair, tilting his head back, claiming his mouth with a hunger that left them both breathless. The bond between them pulsed with warmth, a living thing that connected them on a level deeper than words. "Fuck, Sadie," Dominic breathed against his lips. "You have no idea what you do to me." "I think I have some idea." Sadie smirked, tugging at the collar of Dominic's shirt. "You're pretty easy to read, Alpha." Dominic growled, a low, possessive sound that made Sadie's Omega instincts purr with satisfaction. "Cheeky little Omega. I'll have to teach you some respect. Will you now?" Sadie's smirk widened. "I'd like to see you try." Dominic kissed him again, hard and demanding, and Sadie melted into it. The world outside the penthouse, the violence, the blood, the uncertainty, faded away. All that existed was this moment, this connection, this bond that was growing stronger with every passing day. Later, Dominic promised, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. "Tonight, I want to show you how much you mean to me." His hand slid down Sadie's back, pressing him closer. Sadie could feel the heat of him, the strength of his arms, the steady thrum of his heartbeat. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, everything he'd never known he needed. "Okay," Sadie whispered. "Show me." The world outside remained dangerous, unforgiving, awash in blood and shadows. But Sadie had found a place in it. Not as a ghost, not as a victim, but as a partner. As an equal. He'd traded his mop for a burner phone, his bucket for a seat at the table. And every time he looked at Dominic, he knew he'd made the right choice. "I'm yours," Sadie said one night, lying in Dominic's arms. "I choose you." Dominic pressed a kiss to his forehead. "And I choose you. Every time. Forever." The city hummed beneath them, indifferent and vast. But they had each other. And in a world of dirt and danger and dark, desperate secrets, that was all that mattered. Dominic rolled them over, caging Sadie beneath him. His dark eyes were burning, his scent wrapping around Sadie like a promise. "Let me show you what forever looks like," he murmured. Sadie reached up, tangling his fingers in Dominic's hair. "Show me." And Dominic did. They moved together in the darkness, slow and tender at first, then building into something more urgent, more desperate. Dominic worshipped every inch of Sadie's body, pressing kisses to his throat, his chest, his stomach. He murmured praise and promises against Sadie's skin, his voice rough with desire and something deeper, something that sounded like reverence. Sadie clung to him, his Omega instincts singing with contentment. He felt claimed, cherished, adored. The bond between them pulsed with warmth, connecting them in ways that words could never capture. When it was over, they lay tangled together, breathless and spent. Dominic's arms were wrapped around Sadie, his face pressed into the curve of his neck, inhaling his scent. "I love you," Sadie whispered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Dominic went still. Then he pulled back just enough to meet Sadie's eyes. His gaze was intense, searching, filled with a vulnerability that Sadie had never seen in him before. "Say it again," Dominic said, his voice rough. "I love you," Sadie repeated. "I didn't think I knew what love was. But this is love. You're my home, Dominic. You're where I belong." Dominic kissed him, deep and fierce and full of desperate joy. "I love you too," he said against Sadie's lips. "I love you so much it terrifies me. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Sadie smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. I'm holding you to that. Dominic laughed, pulling him closer. I wouldn't have it any other way. Months passed. The seasons turned. And Sadie Rossi, formerly Sadie the janitor, became a fixture in Dominic's world. He no longer scrubbed floors, he hunted secrets. He found leaks in the system that even Dominic's best analysts had missed. He was respected, even feared, and the sight of him walking into a room with Dominic's mark on his neck made even the hardest enforcers step aside. The bond between them had deepened, solidified. Dominic had claimed him fully, not with force, but with patience and tenderness that Sadie had never expected from an alpha like him. It had happened on a quiet night, just the two of them, no strings attached, no manipulation. Just Dominic looking at him with those dark eyes and asking permission. And Sadie had said yes. The mating bite on his neck was a constant reminder of what he'd found, a place to belong, a purpose beyond survival. He still carried the scars of his old life, the memories of hunger and loneliness and invisibility. But now they were just that, memories. The reality was warmth and security and an alpha who looked at him like he was the most precious thing in the world. I love you, Sadie said one night, lying beside him in the dark. His hand was on Dominic's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. I love you too, Sadie. Dominic's hand came up to cover his, fingers intertwining. More than I ever thought I could love anyone. Sadie smiled, pressing closer. How did this happen? How did I go from scrubbing floors to this? Dominic laughed softly. You opened a lockbox with a lighter and a bottle of vinegar. You proved that 20 experts were wrong. You walked into my restaurant and found a thief in 4 hours. You looked at me, really looked at me, and you didn't flinch. How could I not fall in love with you? Sadie burrowed into his chest, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat soothe him. I'm still scared sometimes, he admitted. Of the world out there. Of what could happen. I know. Dominic pressed a kiss to the top of his head. But I'll protect you. Always. That's not a promise, Sadie. That's a guarantee. The world outside remained dangerous, unforgiving, awash in blood and shadows. But Sadie had found a place in it. Not as a ghost, not as a victim, but as a partner. As an equal. He'd traded his mop for a burner phone, his bucket for a seat at the table. And every time he looked at Dominic, he knew he'd made the right choice. The city hummed beneath them, indifferent and vast. But they had each other. And in a world of dirt and danger and dark, desperate secrets, that was all that mattered. Forever.